Let's turn to Canada now, which is hosting this year's G7 summit. It's a two-day event in Calgary. The first day was devoted to members of the G7. Today, it's all about the invitees. In total, 7 non-members have been invited to this summit. Prime Minister Modi of India, President Zelensky of Ukraine, President Claudia Sheinbaum of Mexico, President Lula of Brazil, President Lee of South Korea, Prime Minister Albanese of Australia, and President Ramaphosa of South Africa. 7 non-members. This is part of the G7's outreach. They're hoping to make this group more representative of today. And we'll get to that in a bit. But first, let's look at what happened at the summit. 3 main issues were on the agenda: Ukraine, West Asia, and trade. Since 2022, the G7 has imposed sanctions on Russia. They've largely been united on this issue, but not with Donald Trump in the room. The US president says it was a mistake to remove Russia from the group.
G7 used to be the G8. Barack Obama and a person named Trudeau didn't want to have Russia in. And I would say that that was a mistake, because I think you wouldn't have a war right now if you had Russia in. And you wouldn't have a war right now if Trump were president 4 years ago.
Now, to give you some background, the G7 used to be G8, as you heard Trump say. The 8th member was Russia. But in 2014, Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine. And in protest, Russia was removed. Trump is calling that a mistake. The next issue was the war in West Asia. Initial reports said Trump would not sign the joint statement. But as it turned out, he did. And here's what it said, the joint statement. We affirm that Israel has a right to defend itself. We have been consistently clear that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. We urge that the resolution of the Iranian crisis leads to a broader de-escalation of hostilities in the Middle East. So no calls for restraint, no calls for a ceasefire, just a generic demand to de-escalate. Which brings us to the final issue, and that is trade. All G7 countries are looking to strike deals with Trump. One of them succeeded yesterday, and that is the UK.
Thank you very much. We all know the great Prime Minister of the UK, and we just signed a document. This is, sorry about that. This is it.
A very important document.
Little windy.
Fumble aside, this is good news for Keir Starmer. Leaders from Canada and Japan also held talks with Donald Trump, but they could not walk away with a deal. Frankly, this was a throwback to Trump's first term. Back then, too, he had issues with the G7. He said other member nations were not pulling their weight. In the second term, those differences have sharpened. Some are calling it the G6 versus Trump. Which brings us to today, day 2 of the G7 summit, which is basically G7 plus. Prime Minister Modi will be joining the summit today. He is slated to address the G7 outreach group. He will also be meeting the Canadian Prime Minister, and that meeting will be crucial. Ties between India and Canada are near rock bottom. This trip could be a chance to reset things. But standing in the way are the Khalistanis. They have organized massive protests in Calgary. They are being led by the Sikhs for Justice. That's a Khalistani group, Sikhs for Justice. And what is their plan? To ambush Prime Minister Modi. That's the word they've used, ambush him. Thankfully, the summit venue is located away from the city, so we haven't seen any ambushes yet. Nonetheless, this will be a crucial day. As for the G7 itself, it is fighting a battle for relevance. This group dates back to the 1970s. At first, it had only 6 members. It was G6. The US, the UK, Japan, France, Italy, and West Germany. Eventually, more nations joined. Canada in 1976 and Russia in 1997. Back then, these were the biggest economies in the world. They also had a common politics. And don't be surprised, in 1997, even Russia was seen as a close US partner. So this group had political unity and financial power. Cut to 2025, and that is missing. Financial power has certainly reduced. The G8, with Russia included, made up 47% of the global GDP back in 2002. Compare that to the BRICS group. Today, the G7 make up just 29%, from 48 to 29%. Now compare that to the BRICS group. In 2002, BRICS nations made up 24% of the global GDP. Today, they make up more than 36%. The fact is the G7 does not represent the biggest economies of the world anymore. China is the second largest by GDP. India is at number 5. Together, they also make up nearly 3 billion people, India and China. So on paper, BRICS is more relevant than G7. On paper. But in practice, it's not that simple. Other than Donald Trump, the G7 is largely united. We saw that with the joint statement on West Asia. Yes, it was weak, but it was signed off by everyone. You won't see that in BRICS. And that is where the G7 holds the edge. A weaker but united group can do a lot of things. A bigger but divided group cannot. Of course, India won't mind this because we have a seat at both tables.
Firstpost now available in 9 languages on YouTube. English,
Stands at $36 trillion.
French,
Le FMI, comme
German,
Geschäftsführenden Direktor,
Hindi,
$30 trillion ka karjo.
Indonesian,
Pemerintah tanpa pemeriksaan.
Italian,
Sekali radikali. Stop.
Japanese,
$4 trilhões.
Portuguese,
Por causa do próprio balanço patrimonial.
Spanish.
Beautiful bill.
Go to Settings, click on Audio Track and select a language of your choice. Be the first to know what's happening around you in your first language. Firstpost.